For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. The silence of the evening was Kevin's favorite part of living on the outskirts of Serenis, a lush, Earth-like planet far removed from the chaos of the bustling cities. Kevin sat on his porch, a cold glass of whiskey in hand, savoring the solitude. His rugged green eyes scanned the treetops as they swayed gently in the cool breeze. It was moments like these that made abandoning his hectic life back on Earth worth it. He leaned back in his chair, letting his thoughts drift aimlessly when a sound broke through the quiet, a faint rustle near the edge of the woods that surrounded his property. He tensed, setting the glass on the wooden table beside him. His sharp instincts, honed through years of working dangerous jobs back on Earth, told him he wasn't alone. Probably an animal, he muttered under his breath, though his gut told him otherwise. The shadows beyond his porch stirred again, this time closer. Kevin stood, his tall, muscular frame illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. His hand hovered near the knife, clipped to his belt. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice commanding but steady. From the darkness emerged a figure unlike any he had ever seen. She stepped into the light, her presence striking and otherworldly. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue that seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight. Long black hair cascaded down her back in waves, framing a face of extraordinary beauty. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto his, freezing him in place. She wore a sleek, form-fitting suit that clung to her perfectly shaped body, accentuating her thin waist and athletic build. For a moment, neither spoke. Kevin's mind raced as he tried to process the surreal sight before him. Finally, the stranger broke the silence, her voice soft, yet filled with conviction. "Kevin," she said, her tone holding a strange mix of familiarity and urgency. "It's me, Carol." His brow furrowed. "I don't know you." Her lips curled into a small knowing smile. "Not yet, but you will." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "I'm your wife." Kevin's heart skipped a beat, though he immediately dismissed her claim. "Excuse me. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've never seen you before in my life." Carol tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "You don't remember me," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I remember everything about you, about us. You don't belong here, Kevin. Not really. And deep down, you know it." Kevin's hand tightened on the knife handle, though he hadn't drawn it. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about, but you've got the wrong guy." "No," she said firmly. "I've waited lifetimes to find you again. I crossed galaxies to get here because I knew you were here. You might not remember me now, but you will. The memories are still inside you, they've just been hidden." Kevin's mind struggled to keep up. Her words were absurd, yet something about the way she said them made it impossible to dismiss her outright. He took a step back, his instincts warring with his curiosity. "Hidden memories? You expect me to believe that we were married in some past life?" "Yes," Carol replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "and I can prove it. But you have to trust me." Her confidence both intrigued and unnerved him. He shook his head, trying to ground himself in reality. "This is insane. Whatever it is you're after, I'm not interested." She sighed, her expression softening. "I don't blame you for doubting me, but I'll make you remember. I'll show you who you really are and who we are together." Kevin opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, she turned and began walking back into the shadows. "Wait," he called after her, but she didn't stop. As her figure disappeared into the night, she left him with one final statement, her voice carrying on the wind. "I'll come back, Kevin. Whether you believe me or not, I'm not leaving you. Not this time." Kevin stood frozen on the porch long after she vanished, his mind reeling. He glanced at the empty whiskey glass, wondering if this was some bizarre hallucination. But deep down, a small nagging part of him couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't lying. Who was she really? And why did her words stir something within him that he couldn't explain? The quiet night returned, but for Kevin, it was anything but peaceful. Kevin awoke the next morning with the distinct feeling that the events of the previous night had been more than just a dream. He sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his dark, tousled hair, his green eyes staring blankly at the floor. The memory of the blue-skinned woman lingered in his mind, like the haunting melody of a song he couldn't shake. "She can't be real," he muttered to himself, yet even as he said it, he knew he didn't fully believe it. He spent the day trying to distract himself, throwing his energy into tasks around the property, chopping wood, fixing a section of the fence, and scrubbing down the porch railings, anything to keep his mind occupied. But every so often, he would catch himself glancing toward the edge of the woods, half expecting to see her step out of the shadows again. By nightfall, he had convinced himself it was over. Whoever or whatever she was gone. He poured himself a drink, settled onto the couch with an old book, and let the quiet of the evening wash over him. That was when the knock came. 3 sharp raps echoed through the cabin. Kevin froze, his muscles tensing as the book slipped from his hands. He set his drink down carefully, rising to his feet. Another knock followed, more insistent this time. He approached the door cautiously, his knife strapped to his side. When he opened it, there she was, standing confidently under the dim porch light, her blue skin almost luminous against the dark night. "Carol," he said, his voice a mixture of exasperation and disbelief. "You didn't think I'd give up that easily, did you?" she replied, her tone laced with amusement. Kevin leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but I don't have time for games. So, unless you have some proof of this wild story about us being married in some past life, I suggest you move along." Carol stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with determination. "You want proof? Fine. Let me help you remember." "Remember what? A life I supposedly lived on another planet?" He shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You realize how insane that sounds, right?" "I know how it sounds," she said, her voice softening. "But you can't deny that you feel it too. That pull, that connection. It's there, Kevin, whether you want to admit it or not." Kevin opened his mouth to argue, but her words struck a chord he couldn't ignore. There was something about her, an unexplainable familiarity that tugged at the edges of his consciousness. It frustrated him as much as it intrigued him. "All right," he said finally, stepping aside to let her in. "You've got 5 minutes. Make your case." Carol walked past him, her movements graceful yet purposeful. She stopped in the center of the room, her piercing blue eyes scanning the space as if assessing its every detail. Kevin closed the door, leaning against it as he watched her. "First," she said, turning to face him, "you need to understand that this isn't just about you and me. There are others forces at work who don't want you to remember. They've been erasing your memories, keeping you in the dark about who you really are." "Convenient," Kevin said dryly. "So you're saying I've been brainwashed? By who?" "By the same people who tried to separate us in the first place," she replied, her voice steady. "They didn't want us to be together. They couldn't accept that our bond was stronger than their rules. So they erased your memories and sent you here, hoping I'd never find you." Kevin folded his arms, skepticism etched across his face. "And you're here to save me, is that it?" "Yes," she said simply, "because I love you. Because I know that deep down, you still love me too." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For a moment, Kevin didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss her as some delusional alien playing mind games. But another part of him, a part he didn't fully understand, wanted to believe her. "How exactly do you plan on proving this?" he asked finally. Carol reached into a small satchel slung over her shoulder and pulled out a sleek silver device. It was unlike anything Kevin had ever seen, its surface smooth and reflective, with faintly glowing symbols etched into it. "This," she said, holding it up, "is a memory activator. It uses a combination of neurostimulation and holographic imaging to unlock suppressed memories. If you'll let me, I can show you glimpses of our past." Kevin eyed the device warily. "And what happens if I let you use that thing on me? Do I wake up thinking I'm some alien prince or something?" Carol smiled faintly. "You'll wake up with the truth." Kevin hesitated, his instincts warring with his curiosity. Everything about this felt wrong, yet he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward her, the way her presence seemed to stir something deep within him, something he couldn't explain. "All right," he said finally. "Show me." Carol's expression softened, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "You won't regret this," she said, stepping closer. "We'll see," Kevin muttered, his heart pounding as he braced himself for whatever was about to happen. As Carol activated the device, a soft hum filled the room, and Kevin's vision blurred. Shadows and light swirled around him, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard distant voices, one of them startlingly familiar. Then, everything went black. When Kevin opened his eyes, the world around him seemed different, sharper, yet tinged with a faint surreal quality. The soft hum of the memory activator still resonated faintly in the background, but his focus was entirely on what he had just experienced. He blinked, disoriented, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. "You saw something, didn't you?" Carol asked, her voice gentle but insistent. She knelt in front of him, her piercing blue eyes scanning his face for any sign of recognition. Kevin ran a hand through his dark hair, his brow furrowed. I don't know what I saw," he admitted, though the truth was far more unsettling. He had seen Flash's brief, fragmented images that felt both alien and familiar at the same time. A vivid scene had played in his mind, like a half-remembered dream. He had been standing in a room bathed in soft, golden light, holding Carol's hands. She was wearing a flowing, silvery garment that shimmered as she moved, and her blue skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance. He could feel her warmth, hear her laughter, and see the undeniable love in her eyes. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the memory shattered, replaced by a stark, cold darkness. Kevin shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. It doesn't make any sense. I've never been in that place before, but I knew it. I could feel it, like I belonged there. And you, he looked at Carol, his voice faltering. You were there too. Carol's lips curved into a soft smile, though there was a sadness behind it. Because it was real, Kevin. That was our home. You're starting to remember. No, Kevin said firmly, standing up and pacing the room. This has to be some kind of trick. Maybe that device of yours planted those images in my head. Carol remained seated, her expression calm but resolute. The activator doesn't create memories. It only uncovers what's already there. What you saw was a piece of your past, a glimpse of the life we shared. Kevin stopped pacing, turning to face her. If that's true, then why don't I remember more? Why does it feel like trying to grab smoke? Because your mind has been locked for so long, Carol explained, rising to her feet. The memories are fragile, like cracks in ice, but the more we work, the more they'll surface. Kevin let out a heavy sigh, his hands on his hips. He was a man who thrived on control, on certainty, and this situation was the exact opposite of that. Everything about Carol, her presence, her story, the strange familiarity he felt around her, threatened to unravel the carefully constructed life he had built for himself. Let's say for a moment that I believe you, he said, his tone cautious. Let's say we really did have some kind of life together. Why would someone go to the trouble of erasing my memories? Why would they separate us? Carol hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. For the first time, Kevin saw a flicker of vulnerability in her confident demeanor. Because our love was forbidden, she said quietly. On my planet, relationships between certain bloodlines are strictly controlled. My family didn't approve of you. They saw you as a threat to their power. When they couldn't convince me to leave you, they took drastic measures. Kevin frowned, his mind racing. Drastic measures like wiping my memories and sending me to another planet? Yes, Carol said. They couldn't risk killing you outright. It would have drawn too much attention. So they chose the next best thing, erasing every trace of your connection to me and sending you here, far from where anyone would think to look. Kevin's jaw tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. And you've been looking for me ever since? Yes, she said, stepping closer. It's taken me years to find you. I had to leave everything behind, my family, my life, everything I knew, but I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them erase what we had. Her words struck a chord deep within him, awakening an ache he couldn't fully explain. Kevin rubbed the back of his neck, trying to process everything. Even if what you're saying is true, why come back now? Why not just move on? Carol's gaze softened, and she reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. Because I couldn't move on, not without you. Kevin stared at her, his defenses slowly crumbling under the weight of her sincerity. There was something about her touch, her presence, that stirred emotions he couldn't suppress. He hated how much he wanted to believe her, how much he wanted to trust her. All right, he said finally, his voice low. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but I need more than flashes and fragments. If this is real, if what you're saying is true, then show me everything. Carol's expression brightened with hope. I will, she promised. But you need to understand something, Kevin. The closer we get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. The people who did this to you, they'll know we're getting close, and they'll do everything in their power to stop us. Kevin's green eyes hardened, a fierce determination taking hold. Let them try. If they think they can take me down, they've got another thing coming. Carol smiled, a hint of admiration in her gaze. That's the man I remember. For the first time, Kevin felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name, a connection, a spark, a faint glimmer of a past he didn't yet fully understand. And though doubt still lingered, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of revelations and unearthed memories. Kevin allowed Carol to use the memory activator in short, cautious sessions, each one peeling back another layer of his suppressed past. With each flash of memory, the pieces of his old life began to take shape, forming a picture that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. One particular session lingered in his mind. He had seen himself standing on a balcony overlooking a sprawling city that shimmered with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever achieved. The air was warm, filled with the hum of distant energy fields and the soft glow of bioluminescent towers. Carol was beside him, her blue skin radiant under the city's golden lights. They were laughing, their hands intertwined, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, Kevin had felt the undeniable truth of their bond. But the memories weren't all beautiful. Flashes of arguments, of Carol's tears, and his frustration had also surfaced. He remembered the weight of responsibility pressing down on them, the whispers of disapproval from others who saw their love as a threat. The more Kevin remembered, the more he understood why Carol had risked everything to find him, and why she had been willing to defy her entire society to be with him. One evening, Kevin sat on the edge of his porch, staring at the twin moons rising over the horizon. Carol stood behind him, leaning against the doorframe. For once, her confident demeanor was replaced with a quiet pensiveness. "You're remembering more now," she said softly. Kevin nodded, his green eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, I'm starting to see it our life, the way we were. It's strange. It feels so real. But at the same time, it's like I'm watching someone else's life. I don't know how to reconcile that." Carol stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the wooden planks. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. "You don't have to reconcile it all at once. These things take time." Kevin turned to her, his gaze searching. "You keep saying that we were in love, that we had this connection. But I don't understand why. What made you choose me? Out of everyone on your planet, why me?" Carol smiled, a wistful expression crossing her face. "Because you were different. Everyone else followed the rules, did what they were told, lived their lives exactly the way society dictated. But you challenged everything. You questioned the system, broke the mold. You weren't afraid to stand up for what you believed in, even when it cost you everything. That's what drew me to you. You reminded me that there was more to life than just following orders." Kevin let her words sink in, the faint ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds like a lot of trouble." "It was," Carol admitted, her tone playful. "But it was worth it." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged. Kevin felt the pull again, that strange, magnetic connection that defied logic. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something primal. He wanted to resist it, to cling to the life he had built for himself. But the walls he had constructed were crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. "You've got this way of getting under my skin," he said, his voice low. Carol tilted her head, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "And you're not used to that, are you?" "Not even a little." They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. Kevin's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, frustration, longing, curiosity, and an undeniable sense of inevitability. He didn't want to admit it, but he was starting to believe her, and that terrified him. Later that night, as Kevin lay in bed, sleep eluded him. He stared at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. The flashes of memory, the feelings they stirred, Carol's unwavering determination. It was all too much. He had always prided himself on being in control, on being the master of his own destiny. But now, he felt like a man caught in a current, powerless to resist. A soft knock on his bedroom door startled him. "Kevin?" Carol's voice was quiet, hesitant. He sat up, his heart pounding. "Yeah?" The door creaked open, and she stepped inside, her figure silhouetted by the moonlight streaming through the window. She wore a simple, loose-fitting garment, her blue skin glowing faintly in the soft light. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't sleep." Kevin gestured for her to come closer, and she hesitated for only a moment before sitting on the edge of the bed. They sat in silence for a while, the tension between them palpable. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," she said finally. "Whatever you're feeling, confusion, fear, anger, you don't have to carry it by yourself." Kevin looked at her, his green eyes searching hers. "And what about you? You've been carrying this for years, haven't you? Searching for me, running from your past. Don't tell me that hasn't taken a toll." Carol smiled faintly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It has, but finding you makes it all worth it." Her words hit him harder than he expected, and before he could think better of it, he reached out, his hand brushing against hers. She looked up, her blue eyes wide with surprise. "Why me?" he asked again, his voice barely audible. "What makes me so important to you?" She leaned closer, her voice soft, but resolute. Because you're the only one who's ever made me feel alive. Kevin's breath caught, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. He didn't know who moved first, him or her, but suddenly, the space between them disappeared. Their lips met, and the kiss was electric, a collision of passion and longing that had been building since the moment they met. As they pulled apart, Kevin's heart was racing. He stared at her, his defenses completely shattered. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he didn't care. "Whatever this is," he said, his voice steady, "I'm not running from it anymore." Carol smiled, her expression a mix of relief and triumph. "Good, because I'm not letting you go." The next morning, Kevin woke with a strange sense of clarity. The kiss the night before lingered in his mind, a vivid memory that refused to fade. Carol had already slipped out of his room by the time he opened his eyes, but her presence seemed to echo throughout the cabin, a reminder that his life was no longer the quiet, isolated existence he had chosen. He spent the morning repairing the fence near the edge of his property, using the physical labor to clear his thoughts. But as much as he tried to focus on the work, questions gnawed at the edges of his mind. The more time he spent with Carol, the more his skepticism was replaced by curiosity and something he didn't want to name. Was it possible she was telling the truth? Could they really have shared a life in another time, another place? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Kevin decided he needed answers, real answers. He wiped the sweat from his brow and headed back toward the cabin, determined to confront Carol and get to the bottom of everything. He found her sitting at the small table in the kitchen, her blue skin glowing faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window. She was hunched over the silver memory activator, her slender fingers tracing the etched symbols on its surface. When she heard him approach, she looked up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Good morning," she said, her tone light. "You look like a man on a mission." "I am," Kevin replied, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "We need to talk." Carol raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair. "I'm guessing this isn't about breakfast." "No," he said, folding his arms on the table. "I need you to tell me everything. Not just the memories, not just the past, everything. How long have you been watching me?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face. "Why does that matter?" "Because it does," Kevin said firmly. "If we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need to know I can trust you. No more half-truths, no more vague answers. I want the whole story." Carol sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. She set the memory activator aside and met his gaze. "All right, I've been watching you for about a year." Kevin's jaw tightened. "A year? You've been here that long, and you're just now showing up?" "It wasn't safe to approach you before," she explained. "I had to make sure the people who erased your memories weren't still tracking you. I've been keeping a low profile, staying out of sight, but I never stopped watching. I needed to be sure it was really you before I made my move." "Who are these people exactly?" Kevin asked, his tone sharp. "And why are they so desperate to keep us apart?" Carol hesitated again, and Kevin could see the internal struggle playing out in her expression. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice low. "They're part of a group called the Arbiter Council. They control almost every aspect of life on my planet, marriages, careers, even births. They're obsessed with maintaining order and balance, and they saw our relationship as a threat to that balance." Kevin frowned. "Why? What could we have possibly done to make them feel so threatened?" Carol's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not just about us. It's about what we represent. You weren't from my world, Kevin. You were an outsider, someone who challenged the status quo. Our love was a symbol of rebellion, of defying the rules they've spent centuries enforcing. They couldn't allow it to exist." Kevin sat back, his mind reeling. "So, they erased my memories and sent me here to, what? Hide me? Keep me from causing more trouble?" "Exactly," Carol said. "But they didn't just erase your memories, they replaced them. They gave you a new life, a new identity, hoping you'd forget everything and move on. But I never forgot, and I wasn't going to let them win." Kevin rubbed his temples, trying to process the weight of her words. "And you're sure they're not still after me?" Carol's expression darkened. "I can't be certain. That's why I've been so careful. But the more memories you recover, the more likely they'll sense the change. They have ways of detecting disruptions in their work, and if they find out you're remembering..." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Kevin's gaze hardened, a flicker of anger igniting in his chest. "Let them come," he said, his voice steady. "I'm done running from something I don't even remember. If they want to fight, they'll get one." Carol's eyes softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I don't want you to have to fight, Kevin. I just want you to be free to have a choice." He looked at her, his green eyes filled with a mix of determination and something else, something deeper. Then help me. Help me remember everything. If we're going to face this, I need to know who I really am. Carol nodded, her grip on his arm tightening slightly. We'll take it slow. I don't want to push you too far too fast, but I promise I'll help you uncover the truth. Kevin exhaled, his resolve solidifying. All right, let's do this. As Carol picked up the memory activator and began preparing for their next session, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath his feet was shifting. His world had already changed so much in such a short time, and he had a sinking suspicion that the hardest part was still to come. The next memory session was different from the others. Carol adjusted the settings on the activator, her hands steady and precise, but Kevin could see the tension in her shoulders. She was pushing the device further this time, determined to unlock more of his buried past. Kevin sat across from her, his muscles taut with anticipation. Are you sure you're ready for this? Carol asked, her voice soft, but laced with concern. This might be overwhelming. Kevin leaned back in his chair, his green eyes locked on hers. I've come this far. I'm not stopping now. She nodded and activated the device. The familiar hum filled the room, and Kevin's vision blurred as the world around him seemed to dissolve. He braced himself for the onslaught of images, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. Kevin found himself standing in a vast chamber, the walls lined with intricate, glowing patterns that seemed to pulse with life. He recognized it instantly, the grand hall of Serenis, Carol's homeworld. He had been here before, standing at the center of a heated debate. Carol was beside him, her expression defiant. Across from them stood a group of imposing figures, their blue skin darker and their eyes colder than hers. They wore elaborate robes, their presence exuding authority. You cannot defy the Arbiter Council, one of them said, his voice sharp and commanding. This union is forbidden. You are jeopardizing the balance of our society. We're not jeopardizing anything, Kevin heard himself say, his voice strong and unyielding. We're just two people who love each other. You're the ones turning it into a political game. The memory shifted. Kevin saw flashes of Carol's family, their disapproving gazes seared into his mind. He remembered the whispered threats, the constant surveillance, the growing sense of danger. Then came the moment of betrayal, armed guards storming into their sanctuary, tearing them apart. The vision fractured, and Kevin found himself in a dimly lit cell, his hands bound and his body aching. He could hear Carol's voice in the distance, shouting his name, but he couldn't reach her. The pain of that separation hit him like a tidal wave, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. Kevin's eyes snapped open, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He was back in his cabin, the hum of the activator fading into silence. Carol was kneeling beside him, her hands gripping his shoulders. Kevin? She said urgently. Are you all right? He nodded, though his heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I remember, he said, his voice hoarse. I remember the council, the guards, everything. Carol's expression was a mixture of relief and sorrow. I didn't want you to see that part. Not yet. Kevin shook his head, his jaw clenched. I needed to see it. I needed to understand what they did to us. Carol sat back on her heels, her hands trembling slightly. Now you know why I couldn't let it go. Why I had to find you. Kevin leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The weight of the memories pressed down on him, but beneath the pain, there was something else, a fiery determination. We can't let them get away with this, he said. They took everything from us. They don't get to win. Carol hesitated, her blue eyes filled with worry. Kevin, you don't understand how powerful they are. If they find out you've recovered your memories, they'll come after you, after us. They won't stop until we're both erased. Then we fight, Kevin said firmly. You said it yourself I wasn't the type to back down. That hasn't changed. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she smiled. That's the Kevin I fell in love with. That night, as Kevin lay awake in bed, the weight of everything he had remembered pressed down on him. He couldn't stop thinking about the chamber, the council, the cold way they had dismissed their love as a threat. It ignited a fire in him, a deep need to protect what he and Carol had fought so hard to keep. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his bedroom door. Come in, he said, his voice low. The door opened, and Carol stepped inside, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. She was wearing the same loose-fitting garment she had worn the night before, her black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her expression was hesitant, almost shy, an unusual look for someone so confident. I couldn't sleep, she said softly. Me neither, Kevin admitted, sitting up. He gestured for her to join him, and she hesitated only for a moment before crossing the room and sitting on the edge of the bed. For a while they sat in silence, the tension between them growing with each passing second. Finally, Kevin spoke. "We've been through hell, haven't we?" Carol nodded, her gaze distant. "And it's not over yet." He reached out, his hand covering hers. "We'll get through it, together." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. Kevin shook his head. "You fought for me when I didn't even know who I was. If anything, I don't deserve you." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the walls between them crumbled completely. Kevin leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was equal parts passion and desperation. It was a moment of surrender, of letting go of the pain and embracing the connection that had endured despite everything. When they finally pulled apart, Carol rested her forehead against his. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "I won't lose you again." "You won't," Kevin promised. "Not this time." Kevin woke before dawn, the faint glow of the twin moons still visible through the window. The night's intimacy lingered in his thoughts, but the weight of their situation pressed down on him like an iron chain. Carol was still asleep beside him, her expression peaceful for the first time since she'd arrived. Quietly, he slipped out of bed and stepped outside, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Kevin felt a sudden clarity, a sense that everything was about to change. Carol joined him minutes later, her hair loose and flowing in the soft light. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice still husky from rest. "Too much on my mind," Kevin admitted. He turned to face her, his green eyes filled with determination. "I need to know the full truth, all of it. If we're going to face this together, there can't be any more secrets." Carol hesitated but eventually nodded. "All right, there's one more thing you need to know." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, orb-like device. It glowed faintly in her palm. "What is that?" Kevin asked. "It's a memory core," she explained. "When they erased your memories, I managed to steal this. It contains everything they tried to take from you, your identity, your past, even the moment they took you from me." Kevin stared at the orb, a mix of curiosity and unease. "Why haven't you used it before?" "Because it's dangerous," Carol said, her voice grave. "The moment we activate this, they'll know. They'll come for us, Kevin, and they won't stop until we're gone." Kevin took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "Then let them come. If this is the key to the truth, I want it." Carol hesitated only for a moment before placing the orb in his hands. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." Kevin nodded. "I'm ready." As the orb activated, a surge of light enveloped them, and Kevin's mind was flooded with images. He saw his life as it had been the love, the loss, and the betrayal that had shaped him. He remembered everything, the Council's final warning, his defiance, and the moment he and Carol were torn apart. When the light faded, Kevin staggered but caught himself. His breathing was heavy, but his green eyes burned with a newfound fire. "I remember," he said, his voice steady. "Everything." Carol placed a hand on his arm. "Then you know what we're up against." "I do," Kevin said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "And they don't stand a chance." The sound of distant engines roared through the air, shattering the morning calm. Carol's eyes widened, and she turned toward the horizon. "They're here." Kevin's smile hardened into a grim expression. "Let's finish this." The sky above Kevin's cabin filled with the thunderous roar of approaching ships, their sleek forms cutting through the clouds like predators. Carol stood beside him, her expression tense but resolute. In her hands, she held a small silver device, a last resort she had saved for this moment. "They'll try to overwhelm us," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We can't let them." Kevin nodded, his green eyes locked on the horizon. "We won't. Whatever happens, we do this together." The first wave of Arbiter agents descended, their dark uniforms blending into the shadows. Kevin and Carol moved as one, using the advanced technology she had brought to outmaneuver their attackers. Energy blasts lit up the clearing, the chaos of battle underscored by Kevin's unwavering determination and Carol's sharp instincts. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their love, their freedom, and the life they had been denied. When the last of the agents fell, silence returned to the clearing. Kevin stood with Carol at his side, their breaths heavy but victorious. The ships that had loomed ominously above retreated, the Arbiter Council's grip broken, at least for now. Carol turned to Kevin, her blue eyes shimmering with emotion. "It's over." Kevin reached for her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Not just over," he said, his voice soft, but filled with conviction. "It's a new beginning." As the sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing them in golden light, Kevin and Carol stood together, stronger than ever. Their past had been reclaimed, their bond rekindled, and their future was finally theirs to write.